Well, here we go. Intro to networking this week. One of the things I think you guys will probably be familiar with is this top little bit. If you have done anything in any of the networking classes, I don't think you've quite gotten there in the PC hardware class. If not, if you haven't gotten there, it's probably coming real soon. We're going to talk a little bit about how to do some of these things networking wise in Windows, a little bit in Mac, and a little bit in Linux as well. So good thing that I'm on the Mac today, because the Mac screenshots that I've got are a little out of date, so I can show you what's up in real time on the real stuff. It doesn't look that different, to be honest with you. We'll get there. So we're going to have to run off the screenshots in Windows, though, because I don't have a Wi-Fi adapter on this VM. And if you hear a little bit of a hum in the or hiss in the background, it's because the Mac fans are going crazy because the Windows VM is trying to update in the background. Yeah. Thanks, Windows. I appreciate you. Anyway, so in Windows, some of the basics. You guys have done this a million times, so even though the screenshots are a little out of date, I think you're probably just fine. So if you click on the little Wi-Fi icon down at the bottom, which I'm sure you're probably connected to, you get a really cool list of all of the Wi-Fi access points that are around you. That one that says connected underneath it is going to be the one that you're obviously actually connected to. If you're not connected to any, you won't see that at all. So in this case, just click on one, click connect, and provide the password that it requires. That is just going to be something that either you have set up yourself or you were given access to, so you'll have the password one way or the other. Airplane mode obviously just turns that into an off state. A lot of times in this scenario, you're just looking at turning off the broadcasting of Wi-Fi, but the device itself does not stop. If you want to stop the device altogether, you're going to have to go into Device Manager and disable that device. And even then, depending on the way that the firmware works in your laptop, that may still not fully turn it off. You may have to go into the BIOS to do that. And then again, depending on how the firmware is set up, you may not be able to turn that off either. You may, in dire straits, you may have to just go unplug it from your laptop. Depending on how conspiratorial you're being, and you need full off of that Wi-Fi card, that's probably the only guaranteed way to do it. Anyway, so as far as all the rest of this stuff goes, one of the common things that you're going to run into, I won't say often, but you will run into it eventually, is Wi-Fi won't work. It says you're connected, it says you're on, it says you have internet, but nothing is working. So a lot of times what you'll end up having to do is come into the Windows settings. So just open up your start menu, hit type in settings, and it's going to be the icon that looks like this, the little gear. And then click on network or Wi-Fi. And that'll bring you here. This will give you that same list. You can toggle on or off the Wi-Fi. And you should be able to go into the advanced options here or manage Wi-Fi settings. This is really going to depend. And here's where Windows gets really tricky. There are 3 current supported versions of Windows right now. And at least 2 of those are different when it comes to this particular window. So if you are on a different version, this I believe is 1803. Wait, so that makes 4. So 1803 is in support, 1809 is in support, 1903 is in support, and 1909 is in support. So let me just take a look real quick. Windows 10 feature. See if we can find a list of all of these. Lifecycle fact sheet, blah, blah, blah. Let's see. So it looks like, okay, so it is 3. It's 1809. So 1803 is not in support. That dropped support November 12th. But if you're on Enterprise, so technically it is in support, but unless you pay for it, you don't get it. And that'll be till November. But this is the column that you need to pay attention to. So May 12th of 2020. So if you're on 1809, you need to upgrade before that date to at least 1903. Then December 8th will be the next one. 1903 will end of life. And then the current version that we're on right now, 1909, will end of life in 2021. So this is a really cool sheet. This is how you know when Windows is going to force you to upgrade. If you see that little icon, look at the VM down at the bottom right here. If you see that little icon down in the screen in your taskbar, that means that it's going to need a big update. So yeah, one of those ones that's going to reboot you, and quite often that's going to have a feature update baked into it. So it's not always. You don't always have feature updates when you see that icon, but more often than not, if it's going to reboot you, it's something pretty big. So anyway, and so it may be this. So you want to go take a look at your updates when it's happening. So anyway, so there are 3 versions of Windows that are in wide use and in support, which means that there's no telling which one of these you're going to actually get to. If you want to find out what version of Windows you're on, you do System, go to Settings. Yeah, I guess you could just type in Settings. Yeah, so that was network and internet. So what you wanted to do, network and internet, Wi-Fi will be part of here if you have a Wi-Fi card. I do not, since it's a VM, so you won't see that. But when you click on it, you'll get a window similar to this one right here on the notes. And you should be able to forget a network. Yeah, so let me finish that point. The whole point of this was to go to the advanced options of the manage Wi-Fi settings, depending on your version of Windows, and forget or remove that particular network. That way, it will forget all the passwords, it'll forget the last time you connected, it'll forget all the information, MAC addressing information, everything. That way, you can start fresh on a Wi-Fi access point. That one is actually pretty big. So, to figure this out, as far as what version of Windows you've got, you want to go to System, all the way down to About, and then it'll tell you, I am currently on 1903. So, it's probably trying to get me up to 1909. This is part of the update set. If you're on 1809, you're going to be in the same boat where it's going to continue to try. And as it comes closer to May, it will try more and more often. So here's the deal. Take your future into your hands. If you're actually using Windows on your laptop, you want to get ahead of that update so it doesn't force it on you and you lose stuff in the middle of the night when it decides to reboot or something like that. So get ahead of that. The one way, and I mean, I complain about it as well, but the one way that you can prevent those random reboots is to actually run the updates yourself. So run the updates yourself. That's the bottom line on that story. Anyway, the old way of doing Windows stuff. So if you're familiar with Windows 7 or Windows 8, then the old way of dealing with networking is still there. If you go into network and internet, and for me it'd be Ethernet, but for you it'll be Wi-Fi. You can still get to the same thing. Change adapter options. So if you look up here, you have that in that same box, right? Wi-Fi access, change adapter options. I've got it under Ethernet here. Click on that, and that'll bring up this. Most people will have more than 2. So if you have VirtualBox installed, you'll see 1, the VirtualBox host-only adapter. You don't ever really want to mess with that. That is already pre-configured for you. You'll see Ethernet if you have an actual Ethernet jack on your laptop, or if you plug in a dongle that has an Ethernet adapter, this will show up. And of course, Wi-Fi. And if you have Bluetooth, Bluetooth will show up in here as well. It is considered a network device. And but Wi-Fi is the one that you want to typically deal with a lot of times, and you'll see it like that. You'll see Wi-Fi in here. And at this point, you should be able to deal with it no matter what. So whether you have Ethernet or Wi-Fi, you should be able to deal with the settings no matter whichever adapter you're on. It'll look the same. So one of the big things that you want to know about all of this is how to set yourself an IP address. So obtain IP address automatically. What does that mean? In this case, obtain IP address automatically means that your laptop or your desktop or your device is going to try and get an IP address from a DHCP server. So DHCP is a protocol that gives out IP addresses to computers that ask. It is a blind protocol, and what I mean by that is nobody knows each other when this conversation is happening. So it is basically just a laptop or a desktop yelling at the top of its lungs, Once it gets onto a new network and says, hey, I need an IP address, and if a DHCP server is on that network, it will give it one, unless it is configured not to. The only way you can configure a DHCP server to not service someone is to know its MAC address beforehand. If you want to create a blacklist, like, hey, that guy has been trouble before, I don't want him getting an IP address, so stick his MAC address on a list that says do not service. Or you can go the opposite way with that. You can have a white list. So you can say, here's 20 MAC addresses that I want to allow on my network, and any other MAC address that tries to get on this network cannot get on this network. And I'm not sure how much y'all have dealt with MAC addresses before. I think you probably already covered it in the Network Plus class, but just in case you haven't, open up the start menu, hit CMD. It'll take you to command prompt. You hit ipconfig, ipconfig /all, and that will give you a list of stuff. If you look at, let me see, too far, where it says physical address, that is your MAC address. My MAC address is 0800227EA126D. So if I wanted to add it to a white or a black list, I would use that. One of the things that you'll run into a lot with MAC addresses is that different companies or different operating systems will write them differently. So be aware that Windows will use dashes. Pretty much everybody else in the world will use colons. So 08:00:27. And Cisco had to be different as well. Cisco does them in bunches of 4, but they continue to use colons. So Cisco would write it 08:00:27EA:126D. Now, what you really want to take away from this is that it is a 12-digit number letter combo thing. Yeah. So it's 12 things, 12 alphanumeric characters. The letters only go from A to F. So if you see a G in there, it ain't a MAC address. If you see any other letter above G in there, it ain't a MAC address. If you see 13 characters, it ain't a MAC address. If you see 10 characters, it ain't a MAC address. So 12 characters, 12 alphanumeric characters. That is a MAC address. And if you see letters, it's only A through F. That is coming from a numbering scheme called hexadecimal. So I won't get too terribly far into that. That just know A through F. That's the big deal there. We'll get into hexadecimal a whole lot more, especially when you start talking about IPv6. That is kind of a fun thing to talk about. But yeah, once you get there, that's what you'll need to know. Anyway, Mac. You can get the same information on a Mac. There is really not a whole lot different except for the way that you get to this stuff. Now, one thing that I didn't test, which I probably should have tested before we got here, is does ifconfig still work? Does it work? It does! Yes. So, ifconfig is the alternative, the Unix alternative to ipconfig. It'll give you similar information, but not all the same stuff. In Mac, you really just use the GUI. You always look into the graphical user interface up here to figure out what it is that you're actually dealing with. But you can still find some of that information here, right? So EN0 is going to be, oddly enough, is going to be my Wi-Fi adapter, I believe. Yep, looks like it. So I'll find this information here. My IP address here. The net mask here, I don't know why they write it in hexadecimal, but that is 255.255.255.0. They give you the broadcast ID. So if you've been dealing with IPv4 addresses up to this point, you probably know what a broadcast address is. And yeah, my MAC address will be written here under Ether. So C8E0EB17721B. And notice they use colons. Right? Windows is the only one that I know of that uses dashes. Yay, Windows. But you can find all that same information up here as well. So if you click on Wi-Fi up here, open Network Preferences. You can also get here from System Preferences. So you want to hit the Apple, hit System Preferences, come down to Network, and you'll find that same box. So Wi-Fi, right? Hit yourself. Well, you can see your IP address already and the name of the Wi-Fi that you're connected to. Hit advanced, and you can start seeing some of the additional stuff, right? Here's your MAC address. Here are all of the list of things that I have been connected to before. The way that you want to delete these is select them, hit minus, and that will, same as in Windows, that will forget your Wi-Fi network. That way you can start fresh just in case something happened. This happens a lot when access points have changed some setting, but you have the old settings saved. It will always try with those old settings. And you might get lucky and it might ask you, hey, something changed. What do you want to change? That might happen for you, but in the case that it doesn't, you can just forget it and reconnect. You can change some of your information here. So if you want to manually set an IP address, you can do that here. If you want to manually set DNS, you can do that here. Add. And you'll typically leave Wins 8021X and proxies alone. And then if you want to see something, information specifically about your hardware, you can find that there. So I kind of skipped over that on Windows. You can do the same thing. So if you go to Open Network and Internet Settings, you can see, go back to Change Adapter Options. If you double click on this guy, you get a Details pane. That will give you all that same information. Can't change anything from here, but it will tell you all the information that you need to know. All right. So let me make sure I don't need to do anything else on the Windows side. Yep, I showed you guys ipconfig all. And then we'll go over some of those terms in a minute. All right. So I can kill all the Windows stuff. Oh, let me double check. Let me just make sure. Because in the lab, I think all I have you doing is just setting IP addresses. Yeah, cool. So I covered everything you need to know on the Windows side. I covered everything you need to know on the Mac side. The thing with the Mac thing, though, is that I'm not gonna test you on it because it is not. I am not officially able to give you a Mac VM. If you want a Mac VM, send me an email. All right, so let me get this down. I didn't want to close it for real. I didn't want to actually power it off because it'll try to update. I will do that after we're done here. Done and done. Let me bring up... Oop, no, not Slack. Yes, it would. Yes, it would. It doesn't work as good as you might think it does, but it does. It does give you all the stuff. It'll be a little slow, but it will. You can click around it. You can all of the basic Mac applications, all that stuff. It'll be there. So you can get a feel for how the Mac actually works. You can install software, all that stuff. You cannot do the App Store at all. And what else can't you do? Like a lot of the Mac apps won't actually connect up. Like obviously Apple TV won't work, but some of the other applications will. So it's more just kind of a trial by fire kind of thing. But yeah, if you're interested, get me on. Actually, you know what? Get me on Slack. That might be easier. So anyhow, on Linux Mint. So in the screenshots I have a different version of Linux called Ubuntu Mate. That has changed a little bit. I mean, it looks exactly the same. The theming, though, has changed a little bit. So I want to kind of get you guys updated on that. But as far as Linux Mint goes, I can actually do that on my laptop. I run Mint on my laptop, so I'll show you that there. I'll get you some of the most updated screenshots there, and it'll contain all the Wi-Fi stuff. So anyhow, I'll get that to you. But it's not absolutely. Oh, and I still have Windows 7. So ignore this. Ignore Windows 7. I'm going to swap that to Windows 10. I swear, I went through the whole class, and I thought I got it all. I did not get it all. Yeah, Linux Mint. Okay. So wanted to make sure everything else was there. Let me do that now. That way you guys have actual record on the video that I changed it. That way you know it's coming. Windows. Oops. 10. VM. Seat of your pants. Seat of your pants. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but I do that a lot. Anyhow, here's the deal. So in Linux Mint, you can do the same general idea, right? There's always a network type connectivity icon down by the clock. Wherever the clock may be, on the Mac it's on the top, on Windows it's on bottom. In Mint, by default it's on bottom. You put it wherever you want. But you can hit this connection information box. And that will give you the same type of information we were talking about before, right? You get your MAC address, you get the driver that you're using, you get IP address, broadcast address, subnet mask, default route, and primary DNS. So that is good information to have, obviously. So if you're just looking for it really quickly, just there you go. Left click there, connection information, easy peasy. If you want to change anything, if you want to kill it for any reason, you can just hit disconnect. Actually, I'll go ahead and do that now so you can see what it looks like, since it's a VM and all. And if you want to turn it back on, you click on the name of the network connection. And if you're watching, you can see connection established, connection disabled, blah, 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 up there in the top. Gives you those little notifications. And then edit connections. So a lot of different things, a lot of different installations might have more than one network connection, which is why you see this window first. It doesn't take you directly into it. This is like that same network adapters window in Windows. You can double click on this, or you can come down and hit the little cogwheel. Either or will take you to this window. And this window resembles very much the way that Mac puts it together. So you have your general information, you have your Ethernet information, which contains your MAC address. You have 802.1x information, you have DCB proxy, and IPv4 settings information. So you can do the same thing with IPv6, but we'll focus on IPv4. So if you want to set a manual, if you want to set any of this stuff manual, one of the cool things that you can do well, I guess in all of the different operating systems, it's a little different in each, is get all the information automatically, or just get the address automatically. That way you can set your own DNS and all that other fun stuff. Or you can set everything manually. You'd have to hit add, and then type in whatever it is you want. 1.50 netmask. Now it asks for the netmask in CIDR. I think you can get away with doing it. Yeah, you can get away with doing it the normal way, I guess the IPv4 looking way. But since you guys will be looking at CIDR anyway, here pretty quick, you can also just write the shorthand notation for it. Gateway, whatever that actually is, 1 probably. And then DNS servers, whatever that might be. Now, here's the thing with all of this. When you save it, it's not always automatic. Notice, didn't change. So one of the things that you can do, I'm going to test this on the fly. I don't know if this is actually going to work. So we'll disconnect. Give that a sec. And then reconnect. And I want to check and see if that actually does it or not. Yep, it does. So you just want to disable and re-enable your adapter. Linux has this thing that a lot of the settings and a lot of the things that you configure are not going to take effect until you actually tell it to. And the way that you tell it to is to turn it off, turn it on again. And you're going to realize this pretty quickly once you guys get into my internet server class, where we are configuring like web servers and things like that. You make all these configuration changes and none of that goes into effect until you restart the service. So that is just an inherent way that Linux in general, doesn't matter what Linux, it could be Ubuntu, it could be CentOS, it could be Red Hat, it could be Linux Mint, it could be anything. They all tend to behave that way. So just be aware that Linux takes that extra step, and that's mostly because it's more of a server operating system than a desktop operating system. It's a server operating system first, and then you have things like Linux Mint where they add on the desktop flavor to it. So be aware. That's the way that you're going to do that. And then, as with Windows and Mac and Linux, To undo these settings, you just come back in. Delete that, remove all that, set that back to automatic, and hit save. And don't forget that extra step. Disconnect it, reconnect it, and you should be good to go. Right. So don't forget to do the reconnect when you're taking your screenshots, because otherwise it's going to say the same IP address twice and you will get it wrong. So make sure when you're coming to see this connection information that it says the right thing. Double check before you submit, because this has bitten people in the past. And I think I only asked for like 4 screenshots, so it's pretty steep if you get it wrong. Yeah, there's 4. They're all quarter your grade apiece. So make absolutely sure that the information is correct. In MCLI Dev Show. So ifconfig totally works, but it doesn't give you all the information. Same as in Mac. It does not give you all the information. One of the things that Ubuntu has that Linux Mint lives on top of. So Linux Mint is Ubuntu, just with extra flavor on it, is NMCLI. So the Network Manager command line interface, you can do dev. If you don't specify a device, it will just choose all of them. And then you say show. And then it will give you. This is essentially the same as that Windows details pane. Gives you everything, right? Tells you the name, tells you the MAC address, tells you the IP address, tells you the gateway, tells you the DNS, tells you domain name, tells you everything. And let me see. Yeah, it gives you your subnet mask in there, but with the shorthand. So be aware that subnet mask is available here. It just does not explicitly tell you with 255, whatever. Gives you that shorthand. So be aware of that. All right. So I think I covered everything. Let me double check. And then just a couple of things that I want to let you guys know. Looks like everything is good. Oh, yeah, there is another way to get that. So ifconfig is actually deprecated. ifconfig is still in use, but once you get into the Linux class, you're going to deal with a operating system called CentOS, CentOS or CentOS, however you want to say it. But they have fully deprecated ifconfig. It does not work anymore. And you'll deal with another one called OpenSUSE, and they too have already removed ifconfig. I suspect in April, when the new long-term support version of Ubuntu comes out, that will also not have ifconfig. But don't quote me on that. It may still be in there. Ubuntu likes to appease the guys that have real long gray beards that are like, oh, back in my day. So ifconfig may still be in 2004. So ifconfig, right, may or may not be there. So don't rely on it. You will need to start to use, you can do IPA. So IP all is really what that stands for. So it's like ipconfig/all, just way, way shorter. And it gives you the same information that ifconfig would give you. And that looks like a whole bunch of terminal vomit. I hate it. You can help yourself just a little bit by adding the -C option, and that will colorize it for you. Depending on how much you like purple, that is the color of all the IP addressing information. MAC addressing information is in yellow. Status of the adapter is in green, or red if it's down, and your IPv6 address is in blue. So yeah, and your adapter itself is in whatever color that is. What is that? Teal, turquoise? I don't know. Anyway, so that's the basics. IP, the colorization of that totally depends on your distribution. So those colors may totally be wrong, but what you're gonna see are these colors. You will see these colors. If you are on a different version of a different version or distribution like OpenSUSE or CentOS, they may colorize it differently. Just be aware. The colors may change, but the information is going to be right. All right, so we've covered all of that. We covered ifconfig. We covered ipconfig. All right, so here's the deal. IP address. You guys know this. You should know this by now. If not, hang around, talk about it. Let's in the operating system's Slack channel. It has become way more important, right? This Slack channel. So hang out in there. Ask questions in there. This is going to be the substitute that we have, at least for the time being, for us to actually talk. right? There is no substitute for face-to-face interaction, right? But, for viral reasons, we can't have all that face-to-face interaction right now. So let's spend some time in Slack. Anyhow, IP address, 32-bit, half of the host address. The idea with this is that it's always going to be, it won't always. It will typically always be some type of private IP address. 192.168 is pretty common. If you do an IP config on your computer right now, you probably have 192.168 something. You may have 172.16, but that goes all the way up to 172.31. So it could be 16, it could be 18, it could be 20, it could be 21, it could be 25, it could be 31, anything in that range. That 172 won't change, but that second digit may, and it's 16 through 31, and including those numbers. So it could be 16, could be 31, and anything in between. As well as 10. If it starts with 10, it's private. Meaning, what I mean by private is that it's on local area networks, right? These are networks that are not directly on the internet. They may be connected to the internet. And at the risk of getting too technical, you have a router that will get you to the internet, and it acts as a translator, right? These IP addresses are not allowed on the internet. So your router does some cool masquerading magic and pretends to be a different IP address once you get out onto the actual internet itself. So if you have 100 different computers and you're behind a NAT router, which is the technology that does that swap for you, all 100 of those devices look like the same device on the internet. But y'all will get into that. If you haven't already, y'all will get into that more in the Network Plus class, so I won't go too terribly far into it. If you guys have questions on that, I'm more than happy to answer that. I just don't want to get too far into it because it's kind of out of scope for this thing. But I'm happy to talk about it. Yeah. Anyway, so subnet mask is the other half of your address. We talked about these, right? 255.255.255.0. You may see larger network definitions. You may see even larger network definitions. You may see even smaller network definitions, right? And Linux, when you're putting stuff in the GUI, will typically want these CIDR notation. And each of these CIDR notations go to those subnet mask in order. So, right? So this one is /24. This one is /16. This one is /8. This one is /26. So again, same deal here. I just don't want to get into the weeds on that in this particular lecture. I'm happy to go into the weeds with you in like Slack or on a separate WebEx or something like that. I just don't want to clutter up this particular lecture anyway. So default gateway or router. Pick your poison. Most admins use these words interchangeably. This is not something, most of the time in casual admin conversation, these all mean the same thing. So default gateway and router. The deal with these is essentially that this is the point that gets you out of your own network, right? So I mentioned that you might have an IP address like this, and it might change once you get out to the internet. That is true. And the point at which you are on the internet versus not on the internet is this guy. Your router will be the guy that connects up to the internet and connects up to your network and bridges the two. The reason you need to know this is if you want to get on the internet, you got to go through that guy. And the way that you go through that guy is you define the IP address of your router. Now with DHCP, because it's all automatic, it typically always happens for you, magically, right? You just plug in, you get an IP address, and you're done. You just go to the internet. That's how it works with pretty much every Wi-Fi access point out there in existence. But if you have a more locked down network, or you have a network that's still living in the Stone Age and static IP addresses everything, you need to know this information. And even if you don't, you need to know how to get this information. So, default gateway, or router. For our purposes, those words are the same. They mean the same thing. It just means the router that gets you to another network. And it doesn't necessarily always have to be the internet. It could be some other network, right? You could have two networks connected up and then another router closer to the internet that gets you out to the internet. There are some pretty complex ways that you can set up these routers, but overall, the router gets you where you want to go. DNS servers, the last little bit. DNS servers do one thing, and they do one thing pretty well. Let me see if I have the host command. Sure do. So on Windows, you will not have this command. I'll show you NSLookup as well. So host is a way for us to resolve names without actually going to that place, right? So consider this. I want to go to a website that I haven't been to today. There's a good chance that my DNS cache, so my DNS local here on my machine, does not remember, let's say, ZDNet. But yet, I'm still able to get there, right? How did that happen? Computers do not deal in names. The computer didn't know what ZDNet meant. Doesn't know what ZDNet.com is, doesn't know where it lives, none of that. None of that. So, by typing that in there, something happens in the background. And that is the same thing that happens when, and I might be showing my age, some of you have probably never used a phone book in your entire life, but imagine you just Googled up a restaurant in town, and you want its phone number, right? You can't just pick up your phone and dial in like the numbers, T9 style, to get to Hefs or whatever, right? You can't just type in HEFFS and it calls Hefs. That's just not how that works, right? You have to look it up. So you would typically type in Hefs into Google, you'd find the number, you take the number, you put it in your phone, you click on the phone icon and it calls out, right? You have to do that first translation. You have to take Hefs to its phone number, use the phone number to get connected to Hefs. That's how this works. So that's what DNS actually does. It does all that heavy lifting for you. So if I do, I guess I probably shouldn't use Hefs. I don't even know if that actually exists. ZDNet.com, it'll tell you there's the IP address to ZDNet.com. If you wanted to go to ZDNet.com, you'll use that IP address. So that's what the DNS service on my laptop did in the background without me ever knowing it. So DNS is integral to the internet. Does anybody remember that? If I asked you in 2 days, what was the IP address of the server that I went to during the lecture? Number one, you probably wouldn't even remember it was ZDNet.com. But number two, even if you did remember it was ZDNet.com, you would not remember the IP address. That's just not how that works. Humans do not do well with numbers. We do pretty good with names. So that's why DNS exists. And you can do this with anything, right? Google.com. You can do, I don't know, just anything, right? Facebook.com. Instagram.com. Sure, whatever. Now, those of you on Windows may be scratching your head, well, I don't have host. Well, you can use NSLookup instead. And you can do the same exact thing, zdnet.com. Outside of the output, everything else is the same. The way that it looks is different. The information that it gives you is the same. Look at that. 64, 30, 228, 118. If we go back up, there it is. Now, the internet's a complex place. It's a very complex place. There are times when the IP address that you get when you ask for the IP address of a server may change. But, again, beyond the scope of what we're covering here. So we can talk about that. There's round robin DNS. There is running your web server on multiple containers across the world or something like that. So, you just the faster route was to get you to a different IP address or something like that. Google tends to do this. When you do Google, you do an NSLookup of Google. If you look at the name that it comes back with, it actually has Dallas in the name a lot of times. And that's just because Google has servers in Dallas, but they're in California, right? So it's just quicker for us to go to Dallas because we live in Texas. So anyhow, long story short, that's what DNS does. It's the phone book of the internet. Understand that, and setting it up in a couple of semesters will be a whole lot easier. So anyway, that's pretty much it for all of the content that I've got for you guys. That's not too long of a video. I think everybody will be able to get through that. All right. So for the couple of guys that I do have here, do y'all have any questions? Silence is good or bad. I can't tell. Anyway, on the lab, all you're really going to need to do, cool. All you're really going to need to do is fire up your Windows and Linux VMs. Show me the information that you have already, ipconfig/all. All right, show me what you have before. Then go and configure a static IP address. I have all the information that you need set right there. You don't need to deal with anything else. So set that up. There we go. Set that up, and then run ipconfig/all again. In Windows, you don't have to worry too much about it. It is automatic. Windows is a desktop first and a server second. In Linux, though, in MCLI Dev Show, to give me the IP addressing information, go in and change the IP addressing information to all of that. The CIDR notation, if you want that shortcut, for this one is 16. 16. 255 is all the bits on, and that equals to 8. 255 again is 8 more, so 8 and 8 is 16. We'll get into that more a little bit later. So anyway, if you want the shorthand at 16, you can also just type that straight in. It's either or. And then when you're done, in MCLI Dev Show. But remember, Linux is a server first and a desktop second, which means that you have to restart the networking stack. And you do that by just maybe disabling network by disconnect, and then click on it again, and that will reconnect it and hopefully have the newly configured IP address set for you. That's all you got to do. As long as you can set an IP address in those two operating systems, you are golden. Get those screenshots right. Do not get a 75 because you took your screenshot and didn't even pay attention to what it said. Double check. And then when you're done with this lab, not for a grade or anything like that, but for your own sanity, go undo that stuff. Remove off the manual IP addressing, set it back to automatic. In Linux, make sure you also delete the IP address and the DNS. Otherwise, it may continue to try and do that. So revert everything back to the way that it was. Take a screenshot. That way you can work backwards. I mean, you'll have your screenshot, right? I mean, 1 and 3 is basically that. So as long as you have it, you're good. Make it the way that it was before you were done with this lab, after you are done with this lab. That way you'll continue to have internet. Windows will go get updates. Linux can get updates, all that stuff. All right. If there are no questions, then I think that's it for everything. Cool. Well, you guys stay safe. Stay indoors as much as you can. And, yeah, we'll hunker down. We'll get through this. So you guys have a good one.